Well, I'm not going to say I'm an uncompromising independent journalist. I just am somebody who's trying to get at least into the news things which most media channels are reluctant to cover or have taken a policy decision not to cover. Essentially, news about movements, news what would be called the progressive, the left point of view in society, that's something which is not coming in at all. And therefore, the need for creating that kind of space within the media, and that's why I really have started doing what I'm doing today. Well, at the moment, honestly, I haven't had any case being launched against me. I have received a couple of legal notices. As you know about legal notices, this is, of course, if you are doing news, this is something you always get. And you have to treat it with the contempt it deserves, that unless there is something which you have done which is wrong, there is no reason why you should take legal notices seriously. Legal notices are, shall we say, the reflex action of companies or individuals who have something to hide, and therefore quite often, instead of answering the questions that has been raised, give you legal notices, hoping that if they threaten you and they're a big company, then people would back off or shut up, and it will create what is known in the industry as a chilling effect. And that's something that we have to be prepared for. If you find, as I say, if you find the kitchen too hot, don't cook. If you find you're afraid of legal notices, I don't think we should be in journalism. The good part about what we are doing is that we are not based on advertisements. We are entirely based on well-wishers who have supported us in different ways, and also the fact that I have put in my personal resources also into this, and having a different background, software industry work that I do, I have had a certain kind of income which I have been able to put into NewsClick for the last 8 years. Given that we are much less prone to, shall I say, corporate pressure, unlike most media which are dependent on advertisements and therefore dependent on corporate pressure, because unfortunately the media today survives largely on advertisements which are given by big corporate houses. I don't think there's any doubt that the Modi government is qualitatively doing things which earlier governments wanted to do but really did not succeed, or didn't do it as well, or did not want to do it to this extent. I think all governments want to control media. That's really not the issue. The issue is how you do it. In this case, there is far more direct threats that have been given both to journalism and to journalists. The threat to journalism comes from the fact that there is now all kinds of laws which are being used, sedition, censorship in different forms, different things are being talked about, and also being characterized as anti-national if you criticize the Prime Minister or you criticize the government. So that's one kind of pressure that is there. But the two other things which I think are the ones creating the problems. One is the corporate houses have been clearly told that they should not be involved with certain kinds of viewpoints, and if these viewpoints are critical of the government, those media houses should not be given advertisements and so on. So there is this fear psychosis which seems to have built up in the corporations, corporate houses, not to give advertisements to any voice which seems to be critical. So that's the second part of it. The third part, which we have seen in the case of, for instance, NDTV and certain other places, it is the kind of, shall we say, equivalent of what used to be called the license Raj. But in this case, really income tax, other tax violations being used against those media houses which pretend or which have stood up to certain kinds of pressures. So we have both the climate of hatred which is being created within the journalistic community, outside it, in the common, shall we say, in the common man's perception, and the might of the state being used against corporate media because they are vulnerable to income tax raids, income tax questions, as well as to the advertisers who are obviously prone to government pressure as well. Well, that's an interesting question because corporations themselves, of course, have been a big threat to media, free media, because their interests they would like to protect by owning the media houses themselves. We've never seen the kind of concentration of media and corporate power that we see today. Yes, in the times gone by, maybe 50, 60 years back, there used to be this talk about a jute press, which was the jute barons who at that time were the major power brokers, as it were, in the country by virtue of big corporate power that they wielded. Those also owned a lot of the media. But this concentration of corporate power in the media was not as much as it is today, with probably 2 or 3 business houses controlling almost 80% of the big media. So we have the Ambanis, Mukesh Ambani in particular, who now has a big part of the media scene. He has acquired a number of companies. We have the Birlas, who also own, from Hindustan Times to also certain other sections where they have made inroads. So probably 2 or 3 corporate houses today, directly or indirectly, own a lot of the media, which also is from television to print media. This is again something which didn't happen earlier, that you did have print media, and in different countries the print media and the television media are kept separate. Cross holdings are not allowed beyond a certain point. India, we've allowed it. As a consequence, from radio to television to print, we have everything together, and of course even big digital media, a lot of them are under this corporate houses. So I think, yes, there's no question that if big corporate houses own 2/3 of your media or 4/5 of your media, press freedom is certainly curtailed, because their relationship with the government, but also their business interest then gets protected. You really can't write about what is wrong with, say, for instance, the Krishna Godavari Basin deal. You cannot write about Anil Ambani's, for instance, stressed assets and the fact that he's now got into the Rafale deal. So all these things then become more and more difficult for media, because business interests are going to be hurt, and those business interests own this media channels or the media houses. It's a good question. I don't think the world knows an answer to what is the way out for media in general. So I'm not going to be able to give a clear answer to that. I think the way forward may be clear of what society should do. Whether it will happen or not, we have to see. It's clear that if we do not have reader-supported news, then this form of media that we see is going to lead to actually independent, free media actually surviving only at the, shall I say, the cracks and fissures of the media world. They will not be the dominant voice. Yes, they can create also a break in the kind of media monopoly, the silence that the media can create by not covering some issues, but it really will not be effective. So we need reader-supported news, we need subscriptions, we need donations, we need different model than this totally advertisement-based model which has been till now the dominant form in which media has worked. So I think that's an important issue. We also have the other issue that almost 80 to 90% of the increased revenue goes to only the digital platforms, which is Google and Facebook, and maybe a few other digital platforms which may emerge or are emerging. Now, what happens to those who create news? Because platforms do not create news. They only search news, they only aggregate news, they only use what other people are creating. So if the platforms get the major share of the advertisements, then there is really no business model to creating of news. And I think that's also the second challenge that we face, that it's not a question of freedom of speech. The question really is that at the moment media does not seem to have a viable business model in the old sense of the term. And that's something that we need to think about and see what can be done. Well, it's interesting is that it happens both ways. So it does mean that you cannot create a silence because social media is there. So if you decide not to cover something, social media can still break that silence. So that is one way social media helps. But it is also true that social media is a purveyor of an entirely different set of so-called news, which is fake news. So between what is the truth and what is fake news, it's very difficult to make a distinction by social media or in social media itself. So yes, there is this, shall we say, break in the consensus of big media that we will not cover certain kind of things. That can be broken by social media. At the same time, the same reason why you can make a break is also the reason that you can have fakes, you can have issues which was, as you know, in the case of Rohingyas, for instance, was an earthquake pictures being shown in Pakistan as if Muslims are being attacked and Buddhist monks are doing the attacks. We have had in the case of Trump's tweet, for instance, we have had one kid beating each other up being portrayed as a Muslim boy beating a Dutch boy up. Various things like that. Of course, we saw the Muzaffarnagar example where well-known personalities from the BJP RSS side also used fake news to whip up communal tensions and communal riots. So these are the kind of risks also the social media comes. You know, the problem in the world is there is nothing which is unadulterated good or bad. It really comes as a package with both mixed in it. And since technology that's created social media is something which is new, it has created this new media. In this new media, you will have both bad and the good. How do you, shall we say, enhance the good and weaken the bad or contain the bad is a battle that we need to have. Well, I don't think NewsClick at the moment has been too much in investigative journalism. That, I think, needs a separate set of skills, which at the moment I don't see at least NewsClick possessing in good degree. Yes, we'd like to do it. Certainly something which is long-form journalism, which looks at a longer time frame, which looks at news as not something which is to be done for the day, but looks at it that, okay, can we invest in an investigation of 2-3 people for a month, 2 months? That's something that at the moment I'm not the best equipped person to speak, because that's not what NewsClick has really been good at or it has really done. So I think that's a space that needs to be created. Whether we can create it, others are creating, we'll have to see. I think the caravan kind of journalism which looks in depth at a certain kind of story is very important for Indian media. And I wish that more such examples are there. And yes, some of even newspapers, for instance, Indian Express, does well on some of these issues. And I think, therefore, we need to see how this part of journalism, which is willing to look at a story in depth and for over a longer period, how this can be sustained. I think is a very important part of journalism and has always been a very important part of journalism. I think that is something which is very important in journalism. I'm not going to say that NewsClick is doing that or is meant or in the short run to do it. Maybe we'd like to do it, but in the long run.